Hello all, welcome to Tech with SAS. So now in this REST Web Services series, we are going to talk about API orchestration and REST response management. So if you haven't heard about this term orchestration, then don't worry, we'll discuss it in detail. So in a typical client server environment, right, we have a client which sends some request to server and then get response back, right? Same structure also, or same process we also follow in REST web services. Whatever request may be in some format, like some content type, maybe XML or JSON, it is sent by the client to the REST web service, and the web service will process that request and send response back to the client. So now the question is that in which format a client or server can interact with each other, because they have to have a talk to in a common language, right? So, for example, if a client want to get response in JSON, then web service have to send in that format only, right? So normally we have JSON and XML, which are like more popular data formats or content type formats which we use. But if you see like in REST web services, JSON is most popular. Maybe in some legacy applications, client need the XML response, but generally it is JSON. But yes, there are like various other formats also that can be utilized as per the requirements. So let us understand how JSON and XML look like in a nutshell. Uh, Suppose you have a employees data in which you have first name, last name of three employees. So this one is an example of JSON format. Here you can see that it is basically an array where we have represented the employee data like a first name and last name. Now, if you see the XML format, it is having the same data. But one thing you can notice that the XML format is more verbose. It has like extra tags, which we don't see in the JSON format. So that's why JSON is like more lightweight and more popular and mostly utilized by the REST web services, right? So now let's understand about the orchestrator or orchestration APIs. What are those? So when we talk about this word orchestration, right, it means that something you are doing at like a in coordination. Okay. For example, you have a banking application and your client want to see all details from the savings account, current account, maybe his shares or demand account, right? And the structure or architecture is such that you have multiple databases in the backend. For example, you have one database or SOR1, which is housing the savings account data. Then you have the SOR2, which is housing the current account data. Similarly, you have SOR3 for demat account data. So now if client want all these data to view or do some processing, so the best practice which we follow in industry for REST is that every resource we assume as a resource. Okay, so every table will have the operations of thread, right? Create, read, update, delete. So for that, for every SOR or every table in the backend server, we create a data API REST web service. So for example, if you have SOR1 and you want to expose it to the client, you will not do it directly. What you will do, you will create a data service or data API 1. Then for SOR2 or like for this current account details, you will create data API 2. Similarly, you will create data API 3. So now these three data APIs have data about the savings account, current account, and demand account, right? So now, but the client want whole data together, right? Not like one by one. It is not being or not able to hit all these data APIs directly, because we have one more layer in between that is called the orchestrator API. So now this is the API which is going to call all these data APIs and perform the orchestration. It means that whenever client send a request, it just send request to the orchestration API, and this API is going to communicate with required data APIs in the background. So now, once response is coming back from these SORs via this data APIs, now it is responsibility of the orchestrator API to basically aggregate response. So suppose you got the three JSON strings, right? So now orchestrator API will do some validations, and after doing the validation, it will concatenate in general terms, concatenate all the JSON strings and send back to the client API or client app, right? So the aggregation or composition of responses which it got from all data APIs, it has to basically merge them in such a way it is meaningful for the client app. So this whole process where we abstract the various calls that are happening between the orchestration API and data API and the SOR or databases from client is called the API orchestration. So now the coordination, right? The coordination onus is on the orchestrator API. It has to call those required APIs. So, for example, now you have one more SOR, maybe for mutual funds, right? So, client want to just get data of the savings account and the mutual fund account. So, now this auxiliary API will just call the savings and the MF database, not all these other databases, right? Or data APIs. So auxiliary API is some component which is doing coordination between our system and the client, right? I hope it is now clear this, right? So now we need to have a way by which a client code knows, okay, whatever REST request it made to the particular REST web service, what happened to that, whether it is successful or failure or some other problem or some other issue, right? So for that, for any response being sent back from the REST web service to the client, so it will also have the some status code, right? And those code will signify whether that request was successful or failure, or it requires some more additional information, right? So these codes are sent normally in the header, and now it is responsibility of a client or client code to pass that response and read those codes and basically act accordingly. So there are like five types of code. Let us see one by one. First is the like 1xx informational type of code. So these codes we don't use much as a developer. Next is the 2xx successful. So whenever the processing of a request from client is successful, we use this series of 2xx. Like for example, there are a few popular codes, right? Like the 200 OK, right? So whenever any request is successfully processed by the client, it's saying OK, it is done successfully and there is no issue. Then, for example, if you want to create some resource, like suppose you want to add a new row in the table in the backend, right? So maybe a client can send you the response code of the 200, but if it sends you that 20, I mean the server send back to you 201, it's like a more accurate information, right? So both are similar, except like 201 is used whenever web service creates a resource in the backend. Then we have the 204 no content. For example, there is a request from client as for deletion of resource. So when web service is doing a deletion, there is nothing to send back, right? So if there's no data send back, it will say okay, it is 204, it is successful, but there's no content to be sent back to the client. So that's why we can use 204. Then, we have seen this previous example of this orchestrator API, right? So where we have one orchestrator calling multiple data APIs, right? So maybe when this orchestrator calling data API 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or so on and so forth, and maybe few are success, few are like 200, few are like 201, maybe few are failure, like some bad request. So now this the orchestra API will send response as a 207 to the client, because there is no one response, right? Because the result it got back is from maybe multiple data APIs, and one is successful, one is having some issues, like, so at that time, whenever we want to convey the multiple status code, then we use the 207 multi status. Then next type of the codes are like 3XX redirection. So like we have this 302 and 307. These are basically used for the redirection. So suppose you are trying to hit a URI, but URI is saying no, 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 please call not call me, but call that particular the URI. So for these are used for the redirection. Then 304 is used for not modified. So, for example, if a client retrieve some data like a few seconds back, and it is again trying to hit the same request. But now now server is saying that okay, okay, that's fine. You send me a request to get resource again, but there is no change happen in between. So there is no updation happened. So there is no point of sending response back and forth to save some bandwidth, right? So at that time we use the 304 not modified, because nothing was changed in resource. So whatever response it was sent recently holds good. Now we will see this 4XX client error. So now whenever client is sending request to this server or web service, it can also have some issues. For example, it has the bad request. So whatever the data inputs or the validations or format web service expects, it is not in that format. So at that time, the server will send it back that okay, it is a bad request. Please rectify it and send me back. Okay. Second is the 4-zone unauthorized. So if any web service is properly secured and somebody want to break into that, then you'll get this 401 that you are unauthorized. Please set up your security credentials before you can access it. Then we have the 403 forbidden. For example, this you get whenever suppose your authentication is set up, but there are some resources which you can access, but there are some resources which you cannot access. So for those requests, right, it is forbidden that okay, we know that who you are, but you are not supposed to see that resource. That's why you got the 403 forbidden. Then we know about this 404 very famous error code whenever we visit some website and it's not found, right? Then we have this 415 unsupported media type. Now a client want a response back as a form of images or maybe some format which service doesn't support. So at that time, it will get okay. Sorry, this we can't support your media type. So it is 415, right? So now we have seen the errors which client can because of client they can occur. Now okay, now client request is reaches the service and it's all good, but there is some issue happens at server side. Maybe it's a code issue or maybe some infrastructure issue. Okay, so because of that, client can't. I mean, the server can't process that request, right? So that is basically we can normally we say okay, it's like a 500 internal server error, very popular error. So so that's these error will will be shown to the client or sent back to the client, right? So I have just put a list of most popular or mostly used mostly use the HTTP codes, but there's a bunch of HTTP, codes which you have to, maybe you can study on your own. And if you have any questions on those particular codes, you will also ask me in the comments. I will try to answer them. Okay. So with this, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Please leave comments or questions if you have any, and please subscribe my channel. Thank you very much.